So normally I don't use mics when I'm giving lectures because I have quite a loud Northern Irish brogue, but can everyone hear me? Yeah, okay, good. So I am Professor Ronan Deazley. I'm from the University of Glasgow, and I'd like to say a few words just to frame this event. I'm also using, I've seen people do this on TV all the time, and it looks really easy, so I'm going to try and do this from an iPad. I'm standing before you really wearing two metaphorical hats. I'm an academic who spent over 10 years thinking and writing about the history and theory and practice of copyright law in Britain. But I've also trained as an archivist. As a copyright lawyer, I have for a long time been really interested in the way that copyright shapes and impacts the work of the cultural heritage sector. And I decided to learn more about that sector. So in 2010, I undertook an MSc in Information Management and Preservation at the University of Glasgow, which is an excellent program if anybody's casting around for. And I say that not just as an ex-student, but someone who now teaches on that program. So studying in that program gave me access to a whole range of very experienced archivists, and I had a number of enormously rich conversations with them during my time as a student and afterwards. And during one of those conversations, one of those archivists said as follows: "Copyright makes my job impossible." Now, in the context of the conversation we were having, it was quite a casual throwaway remark, but it was a genuine remark and one that came from years of experience. And for me, it stuck. And it offers a very powerful, some might say depressing, indictment of copyright as it affects the work of the archive sector. We know that archives play an extraordinarily significant role in society, and we know that there are two core imperatives at the heart of the work that archivists do: preservation and access. Archivists are mandated with preserving records created by individuals, public and private sector organizations, and government, and those records enable democratic accountability, they facilitate education, research, and scholarship, and they help us as individuals and as communities to engage with and explore our sense of identity and place in the world. And archivists want to make those records accessible as possible to as many people as possible. Preservation without access is pointless, and the preservation for me is access. So as somebody who's thought for a while about copyright, and as somebody who I'm very privileged to call myself, well, I don't know if I would call myself an archivist. I've trained as an archivist, but I'm glad that I've joined this community. For me, the UK copyright regime is failing archives as memory institutions. It's failing and frustrating the work of archivists who dedicate their professional lives to preserving and making this country's extensive and very rich archival collections as accessible and as useful as possible. Government recognizes that there is a problem. They've been consulting on reform to the copyright regime for the last 7 years or so, and reform is coming. We'll hear more about that later today. But if copyright is failing or not serving the archive community well, then the premise underpinning this whole event is really a very simple one. And that is, from my perspective, the more that we can do to make the work of archivists easier and simpler, more efficient and more effective, then the greater the social benefits will be for everyone. And when I say everyone, I don't mean everyone in this room or everyone who works in the archive sector, but I mean everyone. So within the copyright domain, what evidence can be gathered and what strategies can be developed that might help make it easier for archivists to preserve their collections appropriately and to make those collections as open and as accessible as possible? Those are the questions I think we need to be asking. In terms of evidence, when archives clear rights for digitization projects, how often do rights holders refuse permission? how often do they ask for money? If they do refuse permission, why? Is it about copyright? Do publicly funded archives have budgets for paying copyright fees? Should they? Have any British archives ever been sued for copyright infringement? So there's lots of information, I think, and evidence that we should gather to help ourselves and policymakers and legislators better understand the realities of the copyright regime as it affects and impacts archives. In terms of strategies, one potential strategy, I think, for making the life and the work of archivists easier and simpler and more efficient and more effective is to adopt a risk-based approach to copyright compliance instead of one of strict compliance. And when the Wellcome Library embarked upon the Codebreakers project, it adopted just such an approach. It's an approach that I think merits serious consideration and review, and I want to thank the Wellcome for two things. First, for inviting Create, and Victoria Stobo in particular, for granting us access to this project so that we can consider and interrogate and reflect upon Codebreakers from a copyright perspective. And second, for offering us a platform for locating those reflections within a broader national and international debate about copyright policy and reform. So I hope today will be engaging and informative, entertaining, perhaps, I don't know, provocative, almost certainly. But it's the start of what I regard as a necessary and public conversation about copyright and archives. So I want to thank you all for coming and being a part of that emergent conversation. On that note, I'd like to invite Richard Aspen to say a few words on behalf of Wellcome. Thanks.